The rain came down in sheets so thick that Martha Dawson could barely see 3 feet in front of her, but she kept working anyway because the fence would not mend itself, and the cattle would not stay put if she left the job half done. Her father had been dead 6 months now, taken by a fever that swept through Fort Stanton, New Mexico in the autumn of 1878, and her mother had followed him just 2 months later, leaving Martha alone on a ranch that demanded more labor than any one person could reasonably give. The rain soaked through her cotton shirt and made her fingers slip on the tools, but she gritted her teeth and kept twisting the wire, determined to prove to herself and everyone else that she could manage this land on her own. She was 22 years old and had been working this ranch since she could walk, so she knew every inch of the property and every quirk of the livestock, but knowing something and having the strength to do it alone were two different things entirely. The fence post had rotted through at the base and needed replacing, which meant digging in mud that sucked at her boots and made every movement twice as difficult. Her dark hair hung in wet ropes down her back, and she could feel blisters forming on her palms even through her work gloves, but she refused to stop because stopping meant admitting defeat. That was when she heard the horse approaching through the rain, hoofbeats muffled by the downpour but still audible enough to make her look up from her work. Through the gray curtain of water, she could make out the shape of a rider, tall in the saddle, and moving with the easy grace of someone who had spent more time on horseback than on foot. She straightened up, one hand instinctively moving to the rifle she kept propped against the fence post, because a woman alone had to be careful about strangers even in the best of weather. The rider came closer, and she could see him more clearly now, a man probably close to her own age with broad shoulders and a worn hat that did little to keep the rain off his face. He pulled his horse to a stop a few feet away and looked at her with eyes that were a startling shade of blue-gray, like storm clouds themselves. And there was something in his expression that was not pity or condescension but simple concern. "You should not be doing this alone," he said, and his voice was deep and steady, carrying easily over the sound of the rain. Martha felt her spine stiffen at the words, ready to defend her capability and her right to work her own land, but before she could speak, he had already dismounted and was walking toward her. He reached for the tools in her hands, not grabbing them but offering his palms in a way that was somehow both respectful and insistent. "Name is Adam Carver," he said. "I work for the Brennan Ranch about 10 miles east of here. Was riding through when I saw you out here in this weather." She looked at him for a long moment, trying to decide if she should send him away or accept the help that she desperately needed, but hated to admit wanting. His face was honest, with strong features and a jaw dark with stubble, and there was no mockery in his eyes, only that same steady concern that had been there from the first moment. "Martha Dawson," she said finally, and let him take the tools. He did not waste time with more words, just turned to the fence and assessed the damage with a practiced eye. Within minutes, he had identified the problem and was working to solve it, his movements efficient and sure despite the rain that continued to pour down on both of them. Martha found herself watching him, noting the way his shoulders moved under his wet shirt and the careful precision of his hands as he worked the wire into place. "You have been doing this long?" he asked, not looking up from the fence. "All my life," she said. "This was my father's ranch. My parents both died this year, so now it is mine." She saw his hands still for just a moment, a brief pause that acknowledged the weight of what she had said, and then he continued working. "I am sorry for your loss," he said quietly. "That is a heavy burden to carry alone." "I can manage," she said, but the words came out with less conviction than she intended. "I do not doubt that," he replied, But sometimes managing alone and accepting help are not opposing things. They can exist together. There was wisdom in those words that surprised her, coming from a ranch hand she had just met, and she found herself relaxing slightly as they worked together to finish mending the fence. He did most of the heavy labor, digging out the old post and setting a new one, while she held pieces steady and passed him tools when he needed them. They developed a rhythm without needing to discuss it, moving together like dancers who had practiced their steps, and Martha realized it had been a long time since she had worked alongside someone who understood ranch work as intimately as she did. The rain began to ease as they finished, thinning from a downpour to a steady drizzle, and Adam stepped back to examine their work with a critical eye. The fence was solid now, strong enough to hold even if the cattle tested it, and Martha felt a surge of satisfaction that was only slightly diminished by the fact that she had not done it entirely alone. "Thank you," she said, and meant it. "I should offer you something warm to drink before you ride back. It is the least I can do." He looked at her, rain dripping from the brim of his hat, and smiled for the first time. It transformed his face, making him seem younger and more open, and Martha felt something shift in her chest that she was not quite ready to name. "I would appreciate that," he said. They walked back to the ranch house together, leading his horse, and Martha found herself intensely aware of his presence beside her. The house was small but well built, constructed by her grandfather 40 years earlier from timber hauled from the mountains, and she had always taken pride in keeping it neat despite the endless demands of ranch work. She tied his horse under the covered porch and led Adam inside, immediately moving to the stove to build up the fire and set water to boil. "Coffee," she asked, "please." He stood near the door, dripping onto the floorboards, and she found herself suddenly embarrassed by her own bedraggled appearance. She knew her hair was a mess and her clothes were soaked through, clinging to her in ways that were probably indecent. But Adam was not looking at her with anything approaching impropriety. He was studying the house itself, taking in the details with the same careful attention he had given to the fence. "Your grandfather built this," he said, and it was not a question. "How did you know?" "The craftsmanship. You can tell it was made by someone who intended it to last generations." He moved closer to examine one of the support beams, running his hand along the wood with appreciation. "My father was a carpenter before he turned to ranching. He taught me to recognize quality work." Martha poured the coffee when it was ready, strong and black the way ranch folk drank it, and they sat at the small table near the window. Outside, the rain continued its steady patter, turning the world gray and soft, and inside the house felt warm and safe in a way it had not felt since her parents died. "Where are you from originally?" she asked, cradling the warm cup between her hands. "Kansas," he said. "My family had a farm there, but after the grasshopper plague of '74 we lost everything. My parents and sister moved back east to live with relatives, but I headed west instead. Figured I would try my luck in new territory." "You miss them?" "Every day," he said simply. "But I write when I can, and they understand why I needed to come out here. There is something about this land that gets into your blood. Once you have tasted this kind of freedom, it is hard to go back to a more settled life." Martha nodded, understanding exactly what he meant. She had never lived anywhere but New Mexico, but she could not imagine existing in one of the crowded eastern cities she had read about, where people lived stacked on top of each other and never saw the horizon stretch out endlessly in all directions. "What about you?" Adam asked. "Have you always been here in Fort Stanton?" "Always," she confirmed. "My grandfather came here in the '30s before it was even called Fort Stanton, before there was any military presence at all." He claimed this land and built the house and started the ranch with nothing but his own 2 hands and a stubborn refusal to give up. My father inherited that stubbornness, and I suppose I did too. It serves you well, Adam said, and there was respect in his voice that warmed her more than the coffee. They talked for over an hour, conversation flowing easily between them despite having just met. Martha learned that Adam was 24, that he loved horses more than cattle, that he could play the harmonica and sometimes entertained the other ranch hands with songs around the campfire. He learned that Martha could shoot better than most men, that she had read every book in the house at least twice, that she dreamed sometimes of traveling to California, but could never leave the ranch that held her family's history in every fence post and building. When he finally stood to leave, the rain had stopped completely and weak sunlight was breaking through the clouds, turning puddles into mirrors that reflected the sky. Martha walked him out to his horse, suddenly reluctant to see him go. "The Brennan Ranch," she said. "That is where you are staying, for now," he confirmed. "But I might not be there much longer. Old man Brennan wants to reduce his workforce before winter sets in, says he cannot afford to keep all of us on." The words were spoken casually, but Martha heard the worry underneath them. Ranch work was never guaranteed, and cowboys drifted from place to place following employment, but something about the idea of Adam leaving the area made her chest tighten with disappointment. "I could use help here," she heard herself say, the words surprising her even as she spoke them. "I cannot pay much, but there is a bunkhouse that is empty and I can provide meals. The work would be steady through winter and beyond if you proved reliable." Adam looked at her intently, those storm cloud eyes searching her face for something she could not name. "Are you certain?" he asked. "People might talk, a single woman and a single man living on the same property." "People talk anyway," Martha said with more confidence than she felt. "Let them. I need help and you need work. Everything else is just noise." He smiled then, that transforming smile that made her heart skip, and extended his hand. "Then I accept, Miss Dawson. When would you like me to start?" "Tomorrow," she said, taking his hand and feeling the callous strength of it against her own work-roughened palm. "Come at sunrise and I will show you around properly." He mounted his horse with fluid grace, settling into the saddle like he belonged there, and tipped his hat to her, before turning the animal toward the road. Martha watched him ride away until he disappeared from sight, and only then did she allow herself to smile, feeling something like hope bloom in her chest for the first time in months. Adam arrived the next morning just as the sun was cresting the eastern mountains, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold that promised fair weather. He brought with him a pack horse loaded with his possessions, which turned out to be surprisingly few. Bedroll, spare clothes, tools, saddle gear, a harmonica, and a small collection of books wrapped carefully in oilcloth. Martha showed him to the bunkhouse, a solid structure her father had built 15 years earlier to house extra hands during busy seasons. "It needs some work," she admitted, seeing the place through fresh eyes and noticing the cobwebs in the corners and the dust on every surface. "It has been empty since my father let the last hired men go 2 years back." "Nothing that cannot be fixed," Adam said easily. "I have cleaned up worse." They spent the morning with Martha showing him the full extent of the ranch, all 300 acres of it. The land was good, with a creek that ran year-round providing water for the cattle, and enough grazing to support a decent herd. Her father had been building the operation carefully, never overextending, always planning for the future, but his death had left projects half-finished and plans unrealized. "How many head do you have?" Adam asked as they rode the fence line together. "About 150, Martha said. Should be more, but I had to sell some after my father died to cover debts and living expenses. I have been trying to build the numbers back up, but it is slow going alone." Adam nodded, his eyes scanning the pastures with professional assessment. "The land could support 300 easily, maybe more if you manage the grazing carefully. You have good grass here, and that creek is worth its weight in gold in this territory." "That is what my father always said," Martha replied, feeling a pang of grief at the memory. He had plans to expand, to build the herd up to 500 over the next 10 years. He wanted to make this one of the premier ranches in the territory. "That is still possible," Adam said, looking at her with quiet certainty. "It will take work and time, but the foundation is here. Your father built something worth continuing." Over the following weeks, Martha discovered what a difference it made to have capable help. Adam threw himself into the work with tireless energy, repairing structures that had fallen into disrepair, moving cattle to better grazing, checking fence lines that Martha had not had time to inspect in months. He was up before dawn and often worked past sunset, and Martha found herself working alongside him, their partnership developing into something comfortable and natural. They talked while they worked, conversations ranging from the practical details of ranch management to deeper topics about their hopes and fears, and the lives they wanted to build. Martha learned that Adam had once been engaged back in Kansas, but the girl had broken it off when her family lost the farm, not wanting to tie herself to a man with no prospects. The pain of that betrayal still lingered in his voice when he spoke of it, though he tried to hide it. "She did not love you then," Martha said firmly when he told her the story one evening as they mended tack in the barn. "Real love does not disappear when circumstances change." "Maybe," Adam said. "Or maybe love is not enough when survival is at stake." "I cannot blame her for choosing security over sentiment." "I can," Martha said with heat. "Love should mean standing together when times are hard, not abandoning ship at the first storm. You deserved better." He looked at her with surprise and something else, something warmer that made her skin flush despite the cool autumn air. "Thank you for saying that," he said softly. Martha found herself thinking about Adam at odd moments, noticing things about him that had nothing to do with his skills as a ranch hand. The way he was gentle with the horses, talking to them in low tones that calmed even the most skittish animals. The way he looked in the early morning light, his face serious as he considered the day's work ahead. The way he laughed, rare but genuine, when something struck him as funny. She caught him watching her too, his eyes following her movements with an intensity that made her breath catch. Neither of them spoke of it directly, but the awareness hung between them like summer heat, impossible to ignore. The town of Fort Stanton held a harvest dance in late October, a tradition meant to celebrate the end of the growing season and give the scattered ranch families a chance to socialize. Martha had not planned to attend, having skipped the previous year while deep in grief for her parents, but Adam convinced her to go. "You need to get away from the ranch for an evening," he argued as they finished the morning chores. "All work and no rest will break you down faster than any hardship." "I do not dance," Martha protested weakly. "Then you can watch," he said with a grin, "or I can teach you. I am not expert, but I know enough to get by." They rode into town together that evening, Martha wearing the one good dress she owned, a deep green calico that her mother had made 2 years earlier. She felt self-conscious in it after months of wearing nothing but work clothes, but the way Adam looked at her when she emerged from the house made the discomfort worthwhile. "You look beautiful," he said simply, and the sincerity in his voice made her believe him. The dance was held in the largest barn in town, cleared of hay and decorated with lanterns that cast warm, golden light over everything. Half the territory seemed to be there, ranchers and their families, townspeople, soldiers from the fort, all mixing together in a celebration of community and survival in this hard land. Martha was immediately swept into conversations with people she had known her whole life, neighbors asking after her welfare and expressing sympathy for her losses. She accepted their condolences with as much grace as she could muster, but it was exhausting, and she was grateful when Adam appeared at her elbow with 2 cups of punch. "Rescue mission," he murmured, and she smiled gratefully. They found a relatively quiet corner and watched the dancers swirling across the floor, boot heels thumping against wood in time to the fiddle music. Martha found her foot tapping along without conscious thought, and Adam noticed. "One dance," he said, setting down his cup and offering his hand. "Just one, and if you hate it we will leave immediately." She wanted to refuse, but the hope in his eyes made that impossible. She took his hand and let him lead her onto the floor, and then his arm was around her waist, and they were moving together, swept up in the current of the music and the other dancers. Martha had not been entirely truthful when she said she could not dance. Her father had taught her the basics when she was young, spinning her around the kitchen while her mother played the piano, but she had not danced with anyone since his death. Being in Adam's arms was different, though. Not the innocent joy of dancing with her father, but something far more charged and thrilling. He held her close enough that she could feel the warmth of him through their clothes, and his hand at her waist burned like a brand even through the fabric of her dress. "You dance well," he said, his voice low enough that only she could hear. "So do you," she managed, looking up into his face and finding him much closer than she had realized. The song ended, but they did not move apart immediately, standing frozen in the middle of the floor while other dancers shifted and rearranged themselves for the next tune. Someone jostled Martha from behind and broke the spell, and they moved apart, both slightly breathless. They danced 3 more times that evening, and each dance felt more natural than the last, their bodies learning to move together with increasing confidence. Between dances, they talked with other attendees, and Martha noticed the approving glances from some of the older women, the knowing smiles that suggested they saw something developing between her and Adam that might not be entirely proper, but was certainly understandable. On the ride back to the ranch, both of them tired and content, Adam said, "Thank you for coming tonight. I know it was difficult." "It was easier with you there," Martha admitted. "Everything has been easier since you arrived." She could not see his face clearly in the darkness, but she heard the smile in his voice when he replied, "I feel the same way." November brought the first hard freeze, ice forming in the water troughs each morning and needing to be broken so the cattle could drink. The work was harder in the cold, requiring more layers of clothing and more frequent breaks to warm up, but Martha and Adam maintained their routine with stubborn determination. One afternoon, while checking the northern fence line, they spotted smoke rising from beyond the ridge that marked the edge of Martha's property. Adam stood in his stirrups to get a better look, his expression growing concerned. "That is coming from the Morrison place," he said. "Smoke looks wrong, too thick and dark." They exchanged a glance and then spurred their horses toward the smoke, riding hard across the rough ground. As they crested the ridge, Martha could see flames engulfing one of the Morrison outbuildings, bright orange against the gray sky. Figures were running back and forth carrying buckets, clearly trying to fight the fire. But even from a distance, she could tell they were losing the battle. She and Adam rode straight into the chaos, dismounting on the move and joining the bucket line without needing to be asked. The heat from the fire was intense, driving them back even as they tried to get close enough to throw water on the flames. The building was fully involved now. The roof collapsed inward, and it became clear that saving the structure was impossible. The goal shifted to preventing the fire from spreading to the other buildings nearby. They worked for over an hour, all of them, until the fire finally died down to smoking embers, and everyone could rest. Martha found herself sitting on the ground, exhausted and covered in soot, Adam beside her in similar condition. Mr. Morrison, a gruff man in his 50s who owned the neighboring ranch, came over to thank them. "Would have lost the whole place if folks had not pitched in," he said, his voice rough with emotion and smoke. "That building had all my winter hay stored, going to be a hard season without it." Martha and Adam exchanged another look, this one of understanding. "We can spare some hay," Martha said. "Not a full winter's worth, but enough to help. You can pay me back next year when your hay comes in." Morrison looked like he might argue, pride warring with necessity, but finally he nodded. "I am grateful," he said simply. "I will not forget this." As they rode back to the ranch in the fading light, both of them stinking of smoke and exhausted to the bone, Adam said, "That was generous of you. You do not have an abundance of hay yourself." "We have enough," Martha said. "And neighbors help neighbors out here. It is how we all survive." "Your father taught you well," Adam observed. "He did," Martha agreed softly. "I hope I am making him proud." "I am certain of it," Adam said with conviction. December brought snow, blanketing the ranch in white and adding new challenges to their daily work. The cattle needed hay brought out to them each day. Tracks had to be broken through drifts, and the water in the creek needed constant monitoring to make sure it did not freeze solid. Martha and Adam worked together with practiced efficiency now, rarely needing words to communicate what needed to be done. On Christmas Eve, Martha insisted on making a special dinner, roasting one of their chickens and baking bread and preparing vegetables from the root cellar. It was more elaborate than anything she had made since her parents died, and she found herself nervous as she worked, wanting everything to be perfect for reasons she did not fully examine. Adam had spent the day cleaning the bunkhouse and doing his own laundry, giving Martha space to cook, but she invited him to the main house as evening fell. He arrived with his hair damp from washing and wearing his cleanest shirt, and he had made something that he presented to her with endearing shyness. "It is not much," he said as she unwrapped the package, "but I thought you might like it." Inside was a small wooden box, beautifully crafted with dovetail joints and a smooth finish. The lid was carved with a simple design of mountains and sky, recognizable as the view from the ranch looking east toward the sunrise. "Adam, this is beautiful," Martha breathed, running her fingers over the smooth wood. "When did you make this?" "Evenings, when you were busy with accounts or other things. I told you my father was a carpenter. He taught me basic woodworking before I left Kansas." She looked up at him, touched beyond words, and acted on impulse, rising on her toes to kiss his cheek. "Thank you," she whispered. "It is the most thoughtful gift I have ever received." Adam had gone very still at the kiss, and when Martha stepped back, she could see emotion written clearly on his face. He reached for her hand, holding it gently. "Martha," he said, his voice rough, "I need to tell you something. These past few months working beside you, getting to know you, I have developed feelings that go beyond friendship or professional partnership. I care for you deeply, and if you feel even a fraction of the same, I would like permission to court you properly." Martha's heart was beating so hard she was sure he must be able to hear it. "You do not need permission," she said, her own voice trembling slightly. "I have felt the same way for weeks now. I was just too afraid to say anything, worried I might be misreading the situation." "You were not misreading anything," Adam assured her, and then he was pulling her close, his arms going around her in an embrace that felt like coming home. They held each other for a long moment, and then Adam pulled back slightly to look at her face. "May I kiss you?" he asked. "Yes," Martha said, and then his lips were on hers, gentle and questioning at first, then deeper as she responded. It was Martha's first real kiss, and it felt like lightning and warmth and rightness all mixed together into something transcendent. When they finally broke apart, both slightly dazed, Adam rested his forehead against hers. "I think I have been falling in love with you since that first day in the rain," he confessed. "I think I have been falling in love with you since you took those tools from my hands," Martha replied. They ate dinner together, the food hardly mattering compared to the joy of being able to sit close, to touch freely, to speak openly about feelings they had been carefully hiding. After dinner, Adam produced his harmonica and played Christmas carols while Martha cleaned up, and then they sat together on the worn sofa near the fire, Martha tucked against Adam's side, his arm around her shoulders. "What do you want for the future?" Martha asked, emboldened by their new understanding. "Honestly," Adam said, "I want to stay here with you, building this ranch into everything your father dreamed it could be. I want to wake up beside you every morning and work beside you every day and fall asleep holding you every night. I want children running through this house, growing up with the kind of love and security you had. I want to grow old watching sunsets from that porch. I want all of it if you will have me." Martha turned to look at him, seeing her own dreams reflected in his eyes. "I want all of that too," she said. "But we have only known each other a few months. Maybe we should wait, be sensible about this." "Maybe," Adam agreed. "Or maybe when you know something is right, and waiting just wastes time that could be spent building the life you want." "But I will wait as long as you need, Martha. I am not going anywhere." In the end, they waited until spring, using the winter months to be certain of their feelings and to let the town get used to the idea of them as a couple. Adam moved from the bunkhouse to the main house in February, after Martha pointed out that there was no sense in him freezing out there alone when there were spare rooms in the house going unused. It was not entirely proper, but as Martha had said before, people would talk regardless, so they might as well be comfortable. They were married in March of 1879, in a simple ceremony at the small church in Fort Stanton with half the town in attendance. Martha wore her mother's wedding dress, altered to fit her, and carried wildflowers that Adam had ridden miles to find. Adam wore a new suit, purchased with his saved wages, and looked so handsome that Martha could hardly catch her breath when she saw him waiting at the altar. "I love you," he whispered as they stood together, hands clasped, promising forever. "I love you too," Martha whispered back. The years that followed were not always easy, because ranch life never was, but they were good years filled with hard work and deep satisfaction. The ranch grew as they had planned, the herd expanding, new buildings constructed, the operation becoming more profitable with each passing season. They hired 2 hands to help with the work, good men who respected Martha as much as they respected Adam, and who understood that this was a partnership in every sense. Their first child arrived in the winter of 1880, a boy they named Thomas after Martha's father. He had his mother's dark hair and his father's blue-gray eyes, and from the moment he was born, he was loved with an intensity that surprised them both. Adam proved to be a devoted father, patient and playful, teaching Tom to ride almost before the boy could walk, showing him how to gentle the horses and care for the land. A daughter followed 2 years later, named Sarah after Adam's mother, with blonde curls and a stubborn streak a mile wide. Then another boy, James, quieter than his siblings but observant and clever. The house that had seemed so empty after Martha's parents died was now filled with noise and laughter, and the constant chaos of children growing up. Martha sometimes thought about that day in the rain, how close she had come to sending Adam away when he offered help, how different her life would have been if pride had won out over practicality. She never regretted accepting his help or his love or the partnership they had built together. One evening in the summer of 1888, 10 years after they met, Martha and Adam sat together on the porch watching the sun set in brilliant shades of orange and purple. The children were inside being watched by their oldest son Tom, now a responsible 8-year-old, and for once the adults had a moment of peace. "You ever wish you had done things differently?" Martha asked, leaning against Adam's shoulder. "Married someone with more prospects, an easier life?" Adam laughed and pressed a kiss to the top of her head. "Not for a single second. This life, this ranch, these children, this is everything I ever wanted and more than I thought I deserved. I would not change a single moment." "Not even that first day when you saw a stubborn woman trying to fix fence in a rainstorm and decided to interfere," Martha teased. "Especially not that day," Adam said firmly. "That was the day my real life began. Everything before was just waiting to find you." Martha turned to kiss him properly, still feeling that same spark she had felt on Christmas Eve nearly 10 years earlier. "I love you, Adam Carver." "I love you too, Martha Carver." They sat together watching the sky darken, the first stars beginning to appear, and Martha felt a profound sense of contentment. The ranch her grandfather had built and her father had expanded was thriving under their care, growing into something even greater than those earlier generations had imagined. Her children were healthy and happy, growing up with the same love of this land that she had inherited. And beside her was the man who had taken tools from her hands in the rain and offered not just help but partnership, friendship, and a love that had only deepened with time. Years continued to pass in the way they do, when life is full and purposeful. Tom grew into a fine young man, taking on more responsibility at the ranch and showing the same natural talent for the work that both his parents possessed. Sarah proved to have a gift with horses that exceeded even her father's, gentling wild mustangs that others had given up on. James discovered a love of books and learning that reminded Martha of herself, though he was equally capable of a full day's work when needed. 2 more children joined the family, another daughter named Grace and a youngest son named William, both adding their own personalities to the growing Carver clan. The house was expanded to accommodate everyone, wings added on either side that maintained the original structure's integrity while providing needed space. The ranch continued to prosper, becoming known throughout the territory for quality cattle and well-trained horses. Adam's reputation as a horseman spread, and people came from considerable distances to purchase animals he had trained or to seek his advice on difficult cases. Martha's business acumen kept the operation profitable through dry years and market fluctuations, her careful planning and conservative management ensuring they never overextended. They weathered challenges together, droughts that tested their water resources, harsh winters that took portions of the herd, the occasional cattle rustler or dispute with neighbors. Through it all, their partnership remained strong, built on mutual respect and genuine affection that never faded even as the first passionate romance of their early years matured into something deeper and more enduring. On their 20th wedding anniversary, Adam presented Martha with another carved box, larger than the first, depicting the ranch as it now existed with all the buildings and corrals and the mountains in the background. Inside was a letter, written in Adam's careful hand, expressing everything he felt but sometimes struggled to say aloud. Martha read it through tears, then tucked it carefully into the first box he had given her, which she still used to store her most precious keepsakes. They celebrated with a party that brought together everyone from miles around. The barn cleared and decorated just as it had been for that harvest dance, where they had first danced together. Their children played music now, Tom on guitar, Sarah singing, James on fiddle, and Martha and Adam danced together just as they had 20 years earlier, moving with the easy familiarity of long practice. "Still beautiful," Adam murmured as they swayed together. "More beautiful, actually." "You have only improved with age." "Flatterer," Martha accused, but she smiled as she said it. "Truth-teller," Adam corrected. "I fall more in love with you every single day." As the 1890s dawned, the children began making their own ways in the world. Tom married a girl from a neighboring ranch, a sensible young woman named Emma who fit seamlessly into the family. They built a house on the eastern section of the property, Tom taking over management of that portion while still working closely with his parents. Sarah married a horse trader from Colorado, a man who appreciated her skills and supported her desire to continue training, and they split their time between Colorado and New Mexico. James went back east to attend college, the first in the family to do so, making them all proud even though they missed him terribly. Grace and William were still at home, both in their teenage years, still learning the ranch work but also beginning to develop their own interests and dreams. Adam and Martha gave them the same gift they had given the older children: support and love without attempting to dictate their futures, trusting them to find their own paths. On a spring evening in 1899, 21 years after that rainy day when they met, Martha and Adam sat on the porch watching the sunset, a habit they had maintained throughout their marriage. They were both in their mid-40s now, still healthy and capable but beginning to feel the accumulation of years of hard physical labor. Gray had begun to thread through both their hair, and lines had deepened around their eyes, but they remained vital and engaged with the life they had built. "Tom asked if we want to start turning over more responsibility to him," Martha said, leaning against Adam as she always did. "Said he and Emma would be happy to take the lead so we could slow down a bit." "What do you think?" Adam asked. Martha considered. "I think your son is ready. He knows this ranch as well as we do, and Emma has good sense. I think we could trust them to continue what we have built." "Our son," Adam corrected gently. "He is as much yours as mine in every way that matters." Martha smiled, still warmed by Adam's inclusive language even after all these years. "Our son," she agreed. "And yes, I think we can start easing back, enjoying the fruits of our labor rather than working ourselves into the ground every single day." "Does that mean I get to spend more time with my wife?" Adam asked hopefully. "Maybe take her on that trip to California she always dreamed about." Martha turned to look at him in surprise. "You remembered that?" "I remember everything you have ever told me," Adam said seriously. "Every dream, every hope, every passing comment, they are all stored up here." He tapped his temple. "So yes, I think we should go to California, see the ocean, explore the coast, take a proper vacation for once in our lives." They made the trip that summer, traveling by train to San Francisco and spending 3 weeks exploring California's coast. It was the farthest either of them had ever traveled, and they experienced it together with the same partnership that characterized everything they did, marveling at the ocean, walking on beaches, eating in restaurants, staying in hotels, living a completely different life for those few precious weeks. When they returned to New Mexico, they came home with stories and a renewed appreciation for the ranch and the life they had built there. The trip had been wonderful, an adventure they would always treasure, but coming home had felt right in a way that confirmed they belonged exactly where they were. The new century arrived, 1900 dawning with celebration and anticipation across the nation. The Carver family gathered at the ranch to mark the occasion, all 5 children present along with spouses and the first 2 grandchildren, Tom and Emma's daughters. The house was packed, full of noise and laughter and love, exactly as Martha and Adam had always hoped it would be. As midnight approached, everyone gathered outside despite the cold to watch for the new year. When the moment came, marked by the ringing of the church bells audible even from town, everyone cheered and embraced. Adam pulled Martha close, kissing her soundly while their children groaned in mock embarrassment and their grandchildren giggled. "To the new century," Adam said, raising a glass. "And to many more years with the woman I love, in the place we have built together." "To family," Martha added. "To the past that shaped us and the future we are creating." They all drank, and then the party continued, extending into the small hours of the first morning of 1900. When everyone finally dispersed to various beds and guest rooms and even the bunkhouse pressed into service for overflow, Martha and Adam found themselves alone in their bedroom, the house finally quiet. "Tired?" Adam asked, beginning to undress. "Exhausted," Martha admitted. "Also incredibly happy. Thank you for this life, Adam, for choosing to help a stubborn woman in the rain all those years ago." Adam came to her, taking her face in his hands with infinite gentleness. "Thank you for letting me help, for seeing past your pride to the partnership we could build, for trusting me with your heart and your land and your dreams." They kissed, soft and sweet, a reaffirmation of vows spoken 21 years earlier, but renewed in countless small ways every day since. Then they climbed into bed together, fitting against each other as naturally as breathing, and fell asleep in each other's arms as they had done thousands of times before. More years passed, the early 1900s bringing changes to the territory and the nation. New Mexico was moving toward statehood, a development that excited some and worried others who feared how it might change the character of the land. The ranch continued under Tom's increasingly capable management. Adam and Martha serving more as advisors than active managers, though neither could fully step away from work that had defined their lives for so long. James returned from college with a law degree and opened a practice in Santa Fe, using his skills to help ranchers navigate increasingly complex property and water rights issues. Sarah and her husband established a successful horse breeding operation that supplied animals across 3 states. Grace married a teacher and moved to Albuquerque, where she opened a school. William, the youngest, chose to stay on the ranch, working alongside Tom and eventually taking over management of the cattle operation. Grandchildren multiplied, a whole new generation of Carvers growing up with stories of their grandparents who had built the ranch from near ruin, who had worked side by side through every challenge, whose love story had become family legend. On their 30th anniversary in 1909, Martha and Adam renewed their vows in the same church where they had married, surrounded by children and grandchildren and friends who had witnessed their journey. Both were in their 50s now, silver-haired and weathered by years of sun and wind, but their eyes still held the same love and respect they had discovered in each other 3 decades earlier. "I would do it all again," Martha said as they danced at the celebration afterward, moving together with the practiced ease of a lifetime of partnership. "Every challenge, every hardship, every moment of fear or doubt, I would do it all again to end up exactly here with you." "As would I," Adam agreed, pulling her closer. "You are still the most extraordinary woman I have ever known, Martha Carver. Marrying you was the best decision I ever made." They continued dancing as the evening wore on, their children and grandchildren joining them on the floor. The barn filled with music and laughter, and the unmistakable feeling of love that had built this family and this legacy. When New Mexico finally achieved statehood in 1912, the Carver Ranch was one of the most respected operations in the new state, known for quality, integrity, and the visible partnership between its founders that had served as the model for the next generation's marriages. Adam and Martha attended the statehood celebration in Santa Fe as guests of honor, representing the ranching families who had built the territory into something substantial enough to become a state. They were in their late 50s now, still active but beginning to slow down in ways that neither acknowledged but both recognized. Their hands were twisted with arthritis from years of hard work, and their backs sometimes protested after long days, but they remained engaged with the ranch and with each other, partners still in every sense of the word. One evening in the summer of 1915, sitting on the porch in their customary spot watching the sunset, Martha said, "Do you remember the first sunset we watched from this porch? The night we admitted our feelings?" "Christmas Eve, 1878, Adam replied immediately. "I remember everything about that night. You had made that special dinner and I gave you the first box I carved. We sat right here and I told you I wanted to spend the rest of my life with you." "And you have," Martha said softly. 37 years since we met, 36 years married." "Where did all that time go?" "Into this," Adam said, gesturing to the ranch spread out before them, the buildings and corrals, the pastures dotted with cattle, the horses grazing peacefully. "Into them." He nodded toward the house where they could hear grandchildren playing inside. "Into us. The time went into building something that will last long after we are gone." Martha took his hand, lacing her gnarled fingers with his equally weathered ones. "I am not afraid of dying," she said quietly, "but I am afraid of losing you, of facing even one day without you in the world." "Then we will have to go together," Adam said with gentle humor. "Bargain with the Almighty to take us at the same time, because I cannot imagine this world without you either." It did not happen that way, of course, because death rarely accommodates our preferences. Adam fell ill in the winter of 1918, a persistent cough that developed into pneumonia. Martha nursed him devotedly, barely leaving his side, but despite all her efforts and the doctor's care, he continued to decline. On a cold January morning, with Martha holding his hand and their children gathered around the bed, Adam opened his eyes one final time. He looked at Martha with perfect clarity, smiled the smile that had never failed to make her heart skip, and whispered, "Thank you for saying yes. Thank you for the life. Thank you for taking the tools from my hands," Martha whispered back. "Thank you for showing me I did not have to do everything alone." Adam squeezed her hand once, gently, and then he was gone, slipping away so peacefully that for a moment Martha could not believe he had actually left. She sat holding his hand for a long time while their children wept around her, her own grief too deep for tears, feeling as though half of herself had been torn away. The family buried Adam on a hill overlooking the ranch, with a view of those eastern mountains he had carved into the first box he ever gave Martha. The funeral was attended by hundreds, people from across the state coming to pay respects to a man who had been known for his integrity, skill, and the visible love he had shown his wife for 40 years. Martha continued at the ranch for 5 more years, surrounded by children and grandchildren who cared for her as devotedly as she had cared for Adam. She remained sharp and engaged, still offering advice on ranch management, still telling stories about the early days, still holding tight to the memories of a love that had defined her life. She died peacefully in her sleep in the spring of 1923, just days after her 67th birthday. Her children found her in her bed, the first carved box Adam had made her clutch to her chest, a peaceful smile on her face as though she had finally rejoined the man she loved. They buried her beside Adam on the hill, and the family carved a shared headstone that read simply, "Martha and Adam Carver, partners in life, in love, in all things, together again." The ranch continued through the generations, remaining in the Carver family into the 21st century, each generation adding to the legacy while honoring the foundation built by Martha and Adam. Their story became family legend, told and retold to new generations as an example of what real partnership looked like, how two people could build something extraordinary when they worked together with respect and love. The carved boxes were preserved as family heirlooms, passed down through the generations along with the story of the rainy day when a cowboy took tools from a stubborn woman's hands and offered not just help but a future neither of them could have imagined. The story of a love that grew from partnership, strengthened through challenges, and lasted not just until death, but beyond, living on in the family they created and the land they nurtured together.